Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the April 20th, 2018 edition of the Intuit Developer Friday Morning Hangout. I'm your host, David Leary. Today's topic is one that a lot of people have a lot of interest in. I think this is one of the most attended Hangouts of all time now today. It's for the QBO Sales Tax API. As many of you know, there's been some changes in the Sales Tax API. Some developers have been caught off guard. There's been bug fixes and improvements, and really this Hangout today is really to get everybody caught up and up to speed on what's been changed and fixed, what developers have to do to handle the changes, and then what the plan is going forward in the future. So today we have a special guest. Pradeep is here today to discuss this with us. Before we jump in, I hand out to Pradeep. I'm just going to run through a couple other just some additional slides. I've completely forgot what I usually call them. And we'll get through those. That gives everybody else a chance to join the meeting who's maybe coming a little bit late. And as I kind of go through those housekeeping slides here, it would click to the next slide. As a reminder, if you have any discussions, please use the chat panel for any discussions. If you have any questions specific to today's topic or guest, please use the Q&A panel. And just before I click, if my click would actually click, give me 1 second, try again here. There we go. Before we jump into this, just a reminder, this will also be recorded. It'll be available on YouTube later, sometime later today. And as of right now, it is being broadcast live to Facebook. So if you're not able to connect into the meeting, you can actually go to Facebook Live and watch it there, and then by default it'll just still be on Facebook afterwards. So a couple things to remind you about. We are doing the Small Business App Showdown for the 3rd year in a row. We'll take all the apps that publish on apps.com. If they publish by August 15th, 2018, in the previous 365 days before that, we will take those apps. They go through a voting phase. We look at some quality criteria. All the other things the rules are on the page. But we basically come down to the final 10 finalists. We take the 10 finalists to QuickBooks Connect in San Jose. They pitch in front of a panel of judges, and the winning app takes home $100,000. So it's really good from a promotion standpoint for your app, because even if you don't win the $100,000, just being a finalist is a big deal, because like this year, we're taking the top 10 finalists to Scaling New Heights. We're taking the finalists to other events and helping them get additional promotion for their app. So it's a really good for any new developers, new apps that are coming on the platform. Definitely want to get your app published in time and join the App Showdown. Now, there's a countdown timer there. That is the day to have your app published on apps.com and officially enter the contest. So if you wait until August 14th to publish your app, you won't have enough time to publish, because you have to go through a marketing review, a security review, a legal review, a technical review, and those take time. So I recommend, like, if you're really trying to make this contest deadline, you should be shooting for maybe a July 1st or first week of July submission to publish on apps.com to make sure you have enough time to go through all those processes. And like I just mentioned before, QuickBooks Connect is coming up, so mark this on your calendar, November 5th through the 7th in San Jose. What we'll do is we'll take the whole QuickBooks ecosystem under one roof. So we'll have accountants, bookkeepers, developers, the marketing bill from developers, biz dev people. We will have small business owners there. So the entire QuickBooks ecosystem, lots of Intuit employees, right, will all be under one roof for 2 days, sometimes possibly 3 days, depending if we do additional content for accountants maybe the day before. And you want to come out to this conference, mark it in your calendar. It's a good way for you as a developer to really get connected with all the other people in the ecosystem, and really helps you push your app over that edge when you get those deep connections with accountants who can make and break your app. And coming up, we actually are taking QuickBooks Connect on the road. So we'll be in Sydney in about 4 weeks, and we'll be doing QuickBooks Connect there. So any of you that are in the Australian region, you definitely want to try to jump in and come to Sydney and attend QuickBooks Connect there. And we're also doing our hackathon there. Apparently this page is not loading correctly. But if you go to Small Biz Hack Sydney, if you just come, you build anything that solves a small business problem, you're eligible to win 5,000 Australian dollars. So it's something to think about. If you maybe you're in Sydney, maybe you've been kicking around the idea of building an app, definitely go to smallbizhacksydney.com, and that's the weekend before QuickBooks Connect. So we'll be there that entire week, the developer team will. And then one last slide. This Hangout and all the events we're doing can always be found on our events page. So it's developer.intuit.com/hub/events. And you can go to this page and register for any of the events that are coming up in the future. A couple of highlights. Next week definitely is something you want to take note of. A lot of people after the first of the year here, developers are surprised because they're getting errors back from the API or they can't write to the API because what they're finding out is accountants are putting closing dates on the data maybe as of December 31st of 2017, and it's causing errors in people's apps and people aren't handling those errors correctly. So next week, we actually have an accountant coming on to explain the importance of the closing date, why they use closing dates with their clients, and then how that impacts you as a developer. So you definitely want to think about next week. And then really kind of in the future, but on June 8th, we are going to finally start unwrapping the QuickBooks Online Payroll API, which many people have been waiting. I mean, me personally, I feel like it's been a decade in the making. So definitely mark your calendars for June 8th as well. And without further ado, I'm going to stop my sharing here. And Pradeep, if you want to introduce yourself, I think you're on mute. If you want to introduce yourself, say hi, and I'll hand things over to you.
Sure. Thanks, David. Hey, everyone. This is Pradeep. I'm an engineer with the QuickBooks team. I've been with Intuit and QuickBooks for quite a few years now. I've been involved in the tax initiative for the last few years, and I've been involved from almost the beginning on the AST track specifically. AST, if you don't already know, is the new system of taxes, as we are calling it. It stands for Automatic Sales Tax. And what else? I work out of Bangalore, India. Yeah. So thank you for joining this webinar. I wanted to set some context. I've actually interacted with perhaps a few of you over email when you reached out for clarifications, and maybe over a previous webinar that I've done about maybe 3 months back. And I know that there is that we probably need to do a better job of communicating the changes, especially on the AST track, because there have been quite a few changes in the last 12 months or so. So I want to maybe use the initial 10 minutes or 5 minutes to set some context on the motivations behind the changes that we've made so far. And where we stand right now and what changes we're looking at in the next few months. And then I'm sure that you would have a lot of questions, and we can jump into addressing some of them after I set the context. Is that okay? Okay.
Sounds like a plan. I think that's a great plan. If you could just on a couple of your browsers, we're getting some feedback, Pradeep, that the font's a little small. You might have to just do a control zoom to zoom in a little bit. That's much better.
Is that better? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me set some context about AST. Just to set the expectation right, this is going to be a discussion of automatic sales tax, which is available to one subset of customers in the US market. Non-US regions are not yet affected by AST. It's not a capability that is available to folks beyond the US region. So if you have any questions about tax in general outside US, I'm happy to take them, but we'll probably have to reserve them till the end of the discussion. This is going to be primarily focused on AST in the US. So just to set some context, forever, I think maybe about 8 years now, taxes have been a manual step for users in QBO. So you could sign up for a QBO company, you could go to the taxes tab, and you could say, I want to set up taxes. And what you would be presented with is pretty much a blank slate. And you would have the ability to, to create a tax agency, to create the tax groups that you think are applicable for you, and the tax rates that are applicable. And once you've created those tax groups, I'm using the word tax group for, I think, what is referred to in the API documentation as tax code. So maybe I'll stick to this tax code. So once you created these tax codes, you could go to a sales transaction and you could create a sales transaction, and you would see this drop down coming up where you could select the tax code, and then you could save the transaction. And pretty much that's how even the API worked. You could create tax codes, associate tax rates, and then you could send in a sales transaction with that tax code associated. And QBO would kind of process that information, apply and calculate the tax amount, and save that invoice for you. So the reason we gave a blank slate, and if you have, if you're familiar with how QuickBooks works outside the US, you would notice that in regions outside the US, we kind of already have a configuration of what agency might be applicable in a given region. For example, if you set up taxes in a QuickBooks company in the UK, you would be prompted to set up an agency called HMRC, which is, I think, an abbreviation for Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. And that's like the federal level agency that is there. And then you would see a tax category called VAT, and other tax categories that are coming up now, like CIS and so on. So that is something that we didn't roll out in the US because in the US the number of tax agencies are quite numerous. For example, in California, you had the Board of Equalization. In Arizona, you have a Department of Revenue. Sometimes cities and counties come up with their own tax rates. So we didn't have a capability to kind of, have a view over the entire entities when it comes to tax all over the US and be able to automatically give users the ability to just select from a pre-configured list. Even the notion of a pre-configured list was too daunting to even attempt to tackle. So that was the motivation behind saying behind kind of designing the workflow in a way where we gave users the ability to define everything. But over time, what we've seen is that sometimes the names of the agencies and the kind of rates and the names of the rates that people have entered are not really mappable to something in the real world. For example, an agency might be called just sales tax agency, which is fine from the user's point of view, or an accountant's point of view who might have set that up for the user. But it really makes it difficult for us to kind of understand and build any kind of new capability on top of it. For instance, does sales tax agency refer to California or does it refer to Arizona? There was no way for us to find that out. And if we and we kind of realized over time that if we wanted to give users the ability to come into QuickBooks, view their liabilities, and then to be able to file them automatically with tax agencies, which is something that we would very much love to give users. That is something that we could not do without understanding what kind of data they were bringing in. And oftentimes we also didn't really lend a hand to users in trying to make life easier for them from a tax point of view, because because the landscape of taxes and the rate at which the taxes change in the US is quite frequent, and the landscape is quite large. And users often had to, talk to accountants, go through government agencies' websites to really find out, what tax might be applicable for them. And some of you might already know this, but the kind of factors that play into determining determining the tax that might be applicable on any given sales transaction is, where are you shipping this product to? What kind of a product is it? Is it being shipped on a tax holiday? And are you shipping to someone who's exempt from taxes, who's been granted an exemption certificate by the local tax authority? So none of this information was something so these were factors that influenced taxes, and it was quite difficult for users to also figure out what tax to apply. And there was no automatic way of kind of keeping track of the tax rates. Like on one day it could be 6.6%, and maybe a month later it would have changed to 6.25%. And if the user didn't really keep tabs on that, they would be tagging the wrong rate on the transactions in QBO. So we took a step back and tried to make life easier for our users, and which is when we kind of identified this company called Exactor, with whom we integrated. What they had at that point was a tax engine, which could, given the characteristics of an invoice, if you could tell the engine the kind of items you were dealing with, the locations where you were actually transacting your business, and the date and whether the customer was exempt or not, they had a very capable engine which could just look at that detail and kind of suggest the right rate to apply through an API. So we kind of integrated with Exactor, and some of you might be aware that we acquired the company some time back. So in May of 2017 is when we started rolling out this capability of being able to automatically recommend transactions within the web product. So if you logged into the web UI and if you were manually creating an invoice, you would see this change where taxes were automatically recommended as you started filling in the invoice. And we released to a very small set of customers in May 2017. Around the same time, we also had to make decisions on how our APIs would behave, because the APIs were not designed for this kind of a taxation paradigm. So the call we took, and this is something that is documented in our blogs as well, is that we would try to preserve backward compatibility for the tax APIs, in terms of saying that, if you were able to create a custom tax agency through the tax agency V3 API, we would still allow you to create that tax agency. And the same applied for the tax service API, through which you could create tax codes and tax rates. But when it came to, that step kind of helped us preserve backward compatibility and in ensuring that apps that relied on those APIs continue to work well. At the same time, we also had to look at invoices and sales receipts that were being created through the APIs, and we had to make a call about what should be the behavior here, because we wanted to take that responsibility of ensuring that data that is coming in is accurate and correct, so that we could build capabilities on top of that data, and give our users more flexibility to do filings and so on directly from within QBO. So we took a call to say that when you send in a sales transaction through a V3 API, the contract doesn't change. The contract remains the way it was before. But the tax group or the tax code and the tax rates that might be applicable on that transaction will be determined by our internal tax engine. So you could still send in a tax code, but if we looked at the invoice and determined that that was the wrong tax code to apply, we might swap out that tax code with the tax code that our tax engine deemed right. But at the same time, we would not discard the tax amount that you sent us. So we would, if you sent in a tax amount to us that we thought was incorrect, we would still accept it, but distribute among the rates that we deemed right for that sales invoice. So that was the underlying principle based on which we did it, because when we distribute the amount among the rates that we recognize, those rates also have an association with the tax agency. Because we distributed that amount, we will be in a position to be able to file the amounts resulting from those transactions with the tax agency. So that was the overarching principle that we took, and that's how the APIs behave even today. So during this time, we started, so from May 2017 till November 2017, we were adding a very few set of users on a daily basis or a weekly basis. Our funnel was quite controlled. Towards November 2017 is when we kind of went GA, which meant that any new user, any company that hadn't set up taxes before and would attempt to set up taxes in the US region would now get the AST experience. So they would be asked during the tax setup to provide their tax jurisdiction based on which we would recommend an agency, and then they would tell us, what was the date from which they started operating in that nexus, and that's it. We would set up taxes automatically for them behind the scenes.
And that started, you said about late
Yes.
November or November 7th.
So we went out live. We went out live in May 2017, but we went GA in November 2017.
Okay, and then pretty much that's been the story bringing us to today. Anybody that's new was just getting it flipped on automatically. But if somebody had their previous QuickBooks, then that's where we are all the way to today, April 20th. So it's that's been the...
Yeah. So if you've already set up, so was your question, David, around, what happens to existing users who already set up taxes the old way?
No, I'm just trying to just reinforce or clarify on the dates. Like, so this rolled out mid-November, and it's pretty much...
Okay. I don't know if it's just me, but your video just froze for a minute there.
Oh, you couldn't hear me? No, I was just trying to clarify on the dates. As far as like just trying to understand, like...
Hello?
You can't hear me? All right, go ahead and continue on.
Hello?
Pradeep, we can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Hey, looks like I dropped off. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. If you want to jump back in.
Sorry, I think I lost you after I asked you the question about, whether your question was about old companies that were on taxes.
Yeah, I was just trying to clarify, like, so this went out mid-November, and I'm trying to get from mid-November to today. And so that went out, and that behavior that went out mid-November, which is anybody that's a new company or a new turning on sales tax, they get the new feature. And
that's right.
Pretty much been that for the last 5 months.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, got it. So where are we today? Like, I think that's what everybody's here for. There are lots of questions coming in. Like, where is this at today now, based on?
Okay, so what we have today is that we have about 60K companies, or I think the number today is about 70K companies on AST right now. And we do have a larger number of companies which are on the older model of taxes. And so there is a way for apps to kind of distinguish between the two kinds of companies. Excuse me. So there is a pref called Partner Tax Enabled. This is available in the documentation if you don't already know this. So if you put in a minor version 4 and ask for a field called Partner Tax Enabled, a value of true for this basically tells you whether the company you're dealing with is an AST company or not. So I'm pretty sure that some of you have a mix of companies, some of which are on the old tax system and some of which are on the new system. And this is how to find out. And David, I don't know if we have a way to kind of send a note to all the participants after the webinar with maybe a detail on this. I'd like to probably include a couple of sentences on this, if that's possible. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I have everybody's email addresses, so I can give them to you, and then you could drop an email to everybody just to give them any information, or shoot the email to me, and then I'll send it to everybody else. We'll get that distributed out for sure.
Okay, yeah. So so that's where we are today. Should I stop? I can probably take some questions if you have any.
Yeah, let me. So a couple that maybe seem to make sense right now. Just to clarify, I think you did cover this, but this only applies to US QBO or all QBOs?
This is only US QBO.
Only US QBO. Okay, so we clarified that one. That's a little bit specific to the math. Or the math. Okay. So there's a comment about apparently there's some tax codes for items that are currently not accessible via the API, and will these be available before the API?
Tax code for items. I'd have to understand that better.
I think you can, if I've been,
Yeah, I'm just trying
I'm
to.
remembering correctly with QBO, you could specify certain items to have
Yeah,
tax. You can associate a sales tax code with an item,
yeah.
but you
So
can't
here's the
apparently get
thing.
to that from the API.
Sure. So I'd have to actually look at the API to see if the V3 API has a tax code association. But for the purpose of this discussion, I don't think the US QBO ever supported tax codes on items, but we did support tax codes on customers.
Okay.
But the global QBO did the opposite. The global QBO supports tax codes on items, but not on customers. With AST though, just taking a very ASP specific AST viewpoint here, we support a new attribute called tax classification on items. That is definitely supported in V4. I'll check and get back to you on the support in V3.
Okay, got it.
It might be under the minor version, but I'll have to check and come back on that. Yeah.
Got it. Good question, Mike. Somebody's asking, so he noticed that when he's setting up AST, the initial agency and related tax codes and rates are available to access via the API. But if he adds an additional agency to QBO, he can't access those via the API, only the initial agency. Why is this, and can we get that changed in the future?
Okay, let me see if I got that right. So
Okay.
if you set up agencies through the API, if you create agencies through the API, you're able to access them, okay.
So he's saying he's unable to access them. So if he creates an agency, he can't access the agencies he creates.
As in, if you do a read of the agency API, you're not able to get that back?
I mean, there's not that level of details, right? Like,
okay.
Unfortunately,
yeah. I don't think that's by design. There is no reason why you shouldn't be able to access your agency. So if that is really a common problem, then that's on me. I'll have to go and look at why that is the case.
Maybe Mike, if you could go to the developer site, help.developer.intuit.com, and create a support ticket for that. So that way we can get tracked and look at it. And if that's the case, you can actually paste in your code the response, and we can have our engineers look at that. Mike, thank you.
Yeah, and just to clarify, that is definitely not by design. If you're not able to read the agency back, that's a problem. We'll have to fix it in the API.
Okay, got it. Somebody, this is a sandbox related question. Somebody wants to know why the Exactor or AST why it isn't in the sandbox for the developers.
Yeah, so this is something I've heard before, and I completely understand where you're coming from. So, like I said, right now we are at a place where we have both flavors out there, and the old tax and the companies on the old taxes are actually more in number than the number of companies which are on AST. But we do need to give you guys a way to enable AST on Sandbox. And what we are going to, so we've been working on this for the last month at least. And what I can commit to is maybe by the end of May, you should be able to have this working in Sandbox. The way it's going to be available is that you're going to have a migration experience where you take the data in the Sandbox company and you will be presented with an experience where you can actually, where you'll be asked to map the old agencies that you have to agencies that the AST system can recognize. So for instance, if you have an agency called Board of Equalization, you could probably select the state of California in a drop-down next to it. And that's how the company would kind of get dropped into the AST experience. And that's how we think, we would be able to serve developers who deal with, both kinds of companies in the interim.
Got it. So it is going to be added. And if I was listening properly to you just now, it's not going to be the full boat thing, but it's going to be just for the state of California, so developers can at least practice with the code, play with the code. Did I hear you correctly on that?
No, so So you could, so I think when you when you are provisioned a sandbox company today, it comes with some pre-filled data. And that data basically has two agencies. It has California and, excuse me, it has California and it has Arizona. So you would be presented with an experience to map both of them. But if you did add an agency of your own, I'll have to go back and check if we can support that as well.
Okay, got it. Thank you on that. Somebody was asking more of general high before we get into some of the math and more specific stuff is what's the general timeline for converting the rest of the existing accounts to AST?
Yeah, so I think by the end of Q4, so that's basically by July, or maybe spilling into August, almost every company will be afforded the ability to kind of migrate over to AST. Does that help?
Got it. Yeah.
So the trouble we have with migrating right now is because we can't automatically migrate you because we don't know. Oftentimes, the data that's already been put in the company is not straightforward to kind of map on our own. So we really need to open it up for users and to because one agency that is present in the company can actually map to 3 different agencies in the real world. So that's what we're trying to get through.
Okay, got it. So it's going to be situational, like as we handle the use cases. Now, anybody in this situation we can handle, and those people will be offered the ability to migrate, et cetera, et cetera. Got it.
Yeah,
now, is there another question kind of related to that? Is people are wondering about what if they don't want to, like, hey, I know more than you. Like we set this up manually in QuickBooks Desktop, and we're right. We are so right. We don't want to use your automated conversions ever. Like, are they going to always, no matter what, is everybody going to be forced, or can they stick with what they have?
So I'd say that eventually everybody will be on AST, and it's not it's not coming from a place. So when I make that statement, it's not coming from a place that everything that we have, that our engine is completely 100% accurate. We try to be 100% accurate. But there could be a possibility that we've missed an update on a rate that's actually changed out in the real world.
Pradeep, I think we may have lost you again. Sorry, everybody. Hopefully, Pradeep will get reconnected. It looks like we might have a burp in his internet connection. And thank you for putting the questions in the Q&A panel. It's definitely helping along the way here. Trying to jump around because we're seeing some duplicate questions. So I'm trying to merge people's questions together and can handle these properly. It doesn't look like Pradeep's coming back in. Pradeep, can you hear me? Looks like we're having some technical difficulties, everyone. If you could just sit tight for a moment, I'm going to try and get a hold of him possibly through Slack and see if I can. I'm getting some word that maybe he completely has a complete power outage on his end. let's just wait about 5 minutes and see if he can make it back. I do apologize for this. Okay, it looks like there's a power outage in Bangalore, and so power is coming back up. So hopefully Pradeep will be back here momentarily. If he doesn't join the next minute, minute and a half here, I'm going to actually have some other people from the team jump in, and we'll continue to handle questions that way. Just thank you for staying with us here during this technical difficulties. I do apologize. Okay, I'm going to actually promote two people from our team, Namisha and Diana, who are engineers here on the developer support team. I'm going to get them unmuted so they can actually handle some questions as well. One moment. If I can find Diana. Pradeep, you're back.
Hey guys, I'm so sorry. There was a power cut at my house. I'm taking the call from home, and yeah, I just dropped. And I think it might happen again. So I'm just installing the app on my phone so that I can at least have some redundancy.
Okay, and I actually brought in Namisha and Diana from the team just as a backup. I can unmute them in case we lose you, or if they need to jump in and clarify on any of the questions along the way. Yep.
Okay, yeah. Sorry, folks.
That's okay. So I'm not positive what I think we were talking about a little bit. Sandbox.
Yeah, so I think we covered Sandbox, right?
Sandbox, and then we started to get into people creating their own, right? Like and having control. Yes, I want to use it. No, I don't want to use it, and kind of that migration related to all that type of stuff.
Yeah. So we'll still allow you to. So the only kind of override that will be allowed on sales transactions is an override of the tax amount. So that is something that will not be taken away. But the ability to define a rate on a sales invoice and have that rate tagged, that is going to be verified by QBO's tax engine. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon.
Got it.
Yeah.
So there's a question that came in that will there be a way to get all the corresponding sales tax codes and rates for all the agencies set up?
Yeah, so I've seen this question a little earlier as well on over email. So the way we work with, so the way our integration works with the tax engine is that when you set up taxes in a company, we kind of don't go and pull down all the tax groups or the tax codes into your QBO company. So we kind of create them on demand. So as and when you create an invoice which requires a particular tax code, that tax code is brought in and it is created as part of your invoice creation. So when your invoice gets saved in the database, before it is saved, we kind of determine what tax code is to be applied. We create that tax code and then tag your invoice with the ID of that tax code. So that's how it works. So you can't, so there is no ability for apps to kind of pull down the list of all codes that might be applicable for a company, at least not yet.
Got it. And so let me guess the thought process behind that is, if I'm a small business owner, I don't want 20,000 tax rates in my QuickBooks Online file. I just need the one that's on my invoices.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
But
I think we lost Pradeep again. Hey, Diana and Namisha, if you guys want to come off mute, I'm just going to continue on some questions here and see if you guys can jump in on a couple of these. This one seems kind of a interesting one from Rao. I have a question about rounding the taxes. Why is the rounding of a number 2.455 equal to 2.45? The question is that more of a truncate versus a roundup?
So I would say this is like a gap in our APIs. We have been having these rounding off issues for about like quite some time, and we know that the issue is mainly related to how the UI is doing the calculation and how we calculate it at the API layer. So currently in V3, we have a difference between the way the taxes are calculated. Like we have a different business layer and there is the API layer. But in V4, we would be tackling this by having the same consistent layer. So that's the difference in V3, where the UI is rounding off logic is like it's at every line and it's doing the correct calculations. While from the API side, the rounding off logic is based on multiple business rules, and that's what we have documented in our developer portal. So the issue is it always leaves 1 cent off when you do the rounding off via the API. And that has been a consistent issue, and we are not able to resolve it because if we try to solve for it, it would be breaking down the existing apps which are there and using the logics.
Okay.
So that's why we recommend that in case you see any rounding off issues with like 1 cent off, so always go back and override the tax amounts you have for each of the lines you have.
Got it. So this is something we eventually will get for free with V4 because V4 will power QBO and it'll be the same API that's powering our developers, and we won't see these inconsistencies going forward. That makes sense. It. Got it. Perfect. So kind of a question related, and it kind of touches on V4 as well, is one of the things they want the ability to do is get the estimated sales tax without actually sending a full transaction to QBO. Would that be available? So basically they could call, get the estimated, and then process that through the API in their app of some type, the estimated sales tax. Is that something that will be available?
Pradeep, do you want to answer that? Because I think we are trying to solve this in V4.
It looks like Pradeep's back. He may be on mute. Pradeep, did you want to try to talk again and see if it works?
I'm actually on the phone right now. I'm waiting for the power to come back in.
Oh, okay. So we can hear you, Pradeep. So I'll repeat the question. Can you hear us just fine?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay. Got it. So somebody's asking about retrieving an estimated sales tax without actually sending a transaction to QBO. Is that going to be possible maybe with the V4 APIs?
Yeah, it's going to be possible in V4. And we recognize that it's a pain for you right now to not have that capability. And we are doing all we can to get that V4 API in front of you guys. So it should be available maybe in a quarter, I think. From a functionality point of view, that API is ready, but there are other concerns around auth that need to be addressed, and that's what we're working through right now so that they can be made available.
Got it. And then that'll help because I think some people in their own app don't know what tax code to assign because maybe the tax code's not in QBO yet, and it creates that back and forth. So that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
And this one, you might even be able to specify or show in the code on this one. It seems kind of straightforward, but how do they force you to use the tax agency that they specify? Basically, this is the presence of like when you're wrong into it and we are right. Can you show how to override that? Actually, you can't because your computer's not on. Sorry. So maybe we'll put that on hold and wait and see if you get your computer screen back. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. So my computer is back in. So I'm going to just mute my phone and try to join back on the laptop.
Okay.
Just give me a minute. Let me know when you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you. That's fine. If you want to reshare and possibly show that.
Okay. Sorry, I kind of lost the thread. What is the question?
Can you show how you can force the tax agency? Like if me as the developer, I know the tax agency is ABC and Intuit saying it's DEF, how can I force?
So you cannot force a tax agency.
You cannot force a tax agency. Okay.
The tax rate, the tax rate, the tax code, and therefore the tax agency is going to be determined by AST. So if you do disagree that the agency that is being tagged is incorrect, I think you should raise a care ticket, because then we need to look at whether you've set up the taxes correct and whether you've specified the information that goes into determining the taxes correctly on the invoice. And this is something that is important to cover, because I mentioned in the beginning that there are various factors that go into determining what is the right rate on an invoice. So oftentimes we find that invoices being sent in without a shipping address, in which case we kind of fall back to like a default company address to be used as a shipping address, which might result in a less than accurate tax rate being applied. And that might be the source of disagreement over what rate has to be applied. So we want those cases to be highlighted. We want to ensure that that all our developers understand the expectation of what of the pieces of information that need to come in on a sales transaction for us to be able to predict and apply the right tax rate. And if our documentation doesn't already talk about it in detail, I'll ensure that we put out another blog talking about it.
Got it. Can you speak in general about, so a lot of developers might be importing web sales, right? From a shopping cart online that's already calculated sales tax at X rate,
right.
And they're just moving historical data in. How are the best ways to handle that?
Yeah, so when you calculate the taxes already in an external system, we understand that you can't change. You don't want the amounts on that invoice to be changed when you sync it back to QBO. So this is where I think we allow you to specify your sales transaction without specifying your tax code, but just by specifying the total tax amount. So the total tax amount that you specify, that you carry over from, let's say, an Amazon or an eBay, we would always honor that tax amount, but we would determine, what rate is applicable on the invoice and distribute that amount among the rates of the invoice. So in other words, you continue to, so if you've been tagging a particular invoice with a tax code and a total tax amount and sending it in, you can continue to do that. We would probably swap out that rate for a more accurate rate, but still continue to honor the tax amount that you sent in.
Got it. Let's see here.
So we also, I think, had put out a recent update that's coming to the that's coming to the transactions API, where we said that the default mode of interpreting an invoice will be to deem that it is that invoice is taxable. So if you don't want taxes to be applied at all on any invoice, please ensure that you are explicitly marking each line item as none. So I'm sure most of you are already familiar with the tax code ref attribute within an item line in a sales transaction. You can, if you omit it completely, we'll try and apply taxes if the item is taxable. Or if you specify tax against the tax code ref, even then the obviously the intent is to have tax applied, so we'll try and apply the right taxes. So the only way to kind of avoid having taxes applied, if you think there's a legitimate reason for that, is to explicitly mark each line item as non.
Got it.
Yeah.
So there's a question kind of at a higher level with if some customers that are currently using Avalara's Avatax integration with QBO.
Right.
Are they going to be prevented from that? Are we going to continue to support that? Because you're going to see possibly a mix of people using either the native sales tax, Avalara, or now they're going to use AST. Like, are we going to still be an open platform? Are we still going to allow this to occur?
Yeah. So Intuit is always going to remain an open platform. Apps that are already there will continue to be there. But obviously, when you have two tax engines at play, you're going to end up with conflicts. So you need to make a choice about understanding the current set of APIs that are there and understanding the implications closely, and then picking which one you want to go with. But Avatax is going to continue to be supported there. We'll have to figure out, if there are points of conflict and see what's the middle ground that works for all of us. Yeah.
Got it. And these questions are great. And if some of you aren't getting all the questions, I think I was just talking to Diane off the side. We'll take these. I think we'll create a blog post and do an FAQ with just all these questions and the written down answers from Pradeep in those as well. Somebody had a suggestion on the shipping address example you gave, like, hey, hopefully you should just default to the billing address instead of anything related to the company, because many people are lazy and they just ship to whatever the billing address is, and sometimes that's the best way to go. So just different suggestions on different way to handle that for sure.
Okay, fair.
This question may not be totally related to AST, but somebody has a question about is there documentation how we calculate taxes in Canada with Her Majesty's tax and the PST tax, and because somebody's having a math problem difference between what they calculate in their app and QBO when it comes to the Canada stuff. Namisha and Dana, if you guys know and you could just post a link in the chat, that might work as well on that one. Somebody's asking about the V4 APIs. Go to our YouTube channel and you can watch a video all about V4 that was last week's Hangout. And Peter Vogel really covers a huge overview of V4, what's coming on the pipe, some of the timelines a little bit on that. So you definitely can get those answers there. Another question about shipping addresses. Somebody was wondering, when we try to get sales tax codes from QBO and it's not in the names, it's in the description. Why is that? So it'd be like CA-San Francisco-San Francisco.
Hold on,
let me write this names.
Okay. When we try to get sales tax codes from QBO, it's not in the name. It's in the description. Okay, so you are doing a read of a tax code API in V3, and you don't see CA San Francisco coming back in the name. It's in the description. So let me check on that. Maker, is it? Yeah. We'll check on that. I think the name should return CA San Francisco. So if it's not, we'll fix it.
Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to.
So there is a question about, will we not need to send tax code? So for AST companies, you don't need to send in the tax code. If you just send in an invoice without explicitly marking non against your item lines, we will try to apply taxes on it automatically.
Got it. And so I think this one from Kevin's kind of related to that. It's just, will AST properly calculate bracket based on sales tax for Florida?
Bracket-based sales tax for Florida. So Kevin, I should probably have said this in the beginning, but I'm not sure of the nuances between one region and the other. But we do have a capable team who understands the nuances of what a bracket-based sales tax stands for. So I'm going to have to ask those guys and get back to you with an answer.
Got it. And one thing I think when it comes to the calculations in this, we're going to calculate correctly. You're not going to calculate correctly. If I go back to 15 years ago when I did tech support for our payroll team, right? Like every day I would take a phone call from a small business owner saying we were wrong calculating the sales tax. I probably took 2,000 calls like that. Every single time we were right and the customer was calculating it wrong, right? So we have a team of people maintaining the tax rates, looking at the tax rates, a compliance team doing these things for payroll. And now this is really kind of the same service. So it's kind of the way to think about this, right? Is almost like you get payroll service to have your payroll taxes calculated correctly. Now you're getting a sales tax service to get your sales tax stuff calculated correctly. And I think that's there's obviously trust, going through that. But I remember taking tech support calls and I'd have to pull out the tax books, and you'd have to have the customer pull out the paper tax book and point at it with their finger. Then they'd be like, "Oh, I guess you do have the right number," because they're either not reading the book right or they're misinterpreting the taxes themselves, et cetera. Yeah. So it's kind of like where, hey, you're paying for this service from Intuit to do these for you, right? And there's going to have to be some trust thrown upon us to calculate these things correctly. And are we going to possibly have bugs? That's always a possibility, but in general, most of the time the more sure somebody is we're wrong is usually an indication that they've done it wrong. It's almost like a retaliatory response, right? The more confidence they are that we're incorrect is almost like a guarantee they're actually the one incorrect. It's the people that are like, it's close, like, hey, is this off by like 5 cents? I can't figure it out. Usually in there, those are the problems where we're kind of having some problems, right? But it's just I think that would be a tip going forward with really for you bookkeepers and accountants, with small business owners, and then use developers. Like, don't overthink it. Don't overthink us too much, because like this is a service we're providing. It's really like, how do we enable this to make you more efficient as a developer? We don't want to cause this strife to some extent. And that's like those.
So I'll just add to that to say that, out of the 70,000 companies that have been live with AST so far, we've probably, and in the last over the last 12 months, we've probably encountered one scenario where the tax rate was not completely up to date and was off by maybe a 0.05% somewhere. Most of the other cases were involved not specifying the amount of detail that we expect to be present on the invoice for us to be able to apply the right tax. So I'm sure that by working together and by ensuring that our developer community has complete information, and even our customers directly have complete information on the factors and how they play into determining the taxes, I think we can reduce even the scope of any discrepancies coming in.
Got it. Somebody's asking about how to tell if the AST is enabled or not enabled. We actually covered that already, so you can watch the replay and rewind to get that out of the get that. It looks like, Kevin, somebody provided a PDF link to the Florida Department of Revenue, so we can probably pass that on to our compliance team to look into that. Got that. So here's to create a customer in QBO, we must push the tax exempt status and the reason for the exemption. Are the tax exempt status and reason for exemption status available in the API customer table? So if I'm creating a new customer and they happen to be tax exempt, can I create them in QBO and send that tax exempt information through the API?
Yeah, so there are two fields here, right? Tax exempt, the tax exempt reason, and then the actual tax exemption number that the state awards you. I think the tax exempt number should already be available in the form of what we've traditionally called a resale number as part of a customer entity. So I'll check in the V3 documentation to see if that attribute is exposed. So this is there in V4, but I think in addition to the resale number, the exemption reason might be, I'd have to check if it's been exposed in V3. But yeah, I mean, we've been focusing on adding this to V4, but based on the need, we can also add it to V3.
Got it.
Yeah.
Here's one kind of related to due dates. We haven't talked about those at all. How will accounting get the proper tax to the right agency on its due date? If you override it, no matter what input we give, will these support cases be expedited? Right now, a support ticket takes forever and goes unanswered.
How will accounting
And I'm assuming he's talking about his developer support tickets, and because I think and maybe we can talk. I mean, we're hitting up the time limit, but we had those technical difficulties, so I'm willing to go over if you and like let's keep going on this. But I think probably we'll still leave some time, Pradeep, so you can actually talk about, hey, here's what we rolled out. Here's the bug fixes we did. Here's bug fixes we plan on fixing still. Like if you could give us an outline of, hey, here's the next wave of what's going to change or what's getting fixed, because I think a lot of that has to do with the support tickets. If we don't have a fix for it, it's going to take a while, and it's going to feel like those support tickets are open for a bit.
Yeah, so I think some of the issues that we've encountered are when there is shipping and discount, both specified on invoices that you're trying to sync from an external source. There is sometimes a very cryptic error message that developers have received when they've for specific instances of invoice syncs. So that's an issue that we are aware of, and we're looking to fix that. But apart from that, I think I see a bunch of requests coming in for support of the new attributes that we've added to items and customers. So that's an action item for me to go back and check and see if it can be added using a minor version. So apart from that, I think we've been focusing our efforts on kind of bringing everybody to a common tax platform so that there is no ambiguity and there is less complexity and conditionality for developers to deal with in terms of determining what should be the right experience for AST customers versus legacy customers and so on. So migration is going to be a big focus area for us. Yeah, apart from that, any bug fixes that come in, we have been, I think, acting on that pretty promptly. Yeah, and then e-filing is something that we've been working on, but it's I'm not sure if it's a capability that will interest this audience. But that's going to be of a lot of value for our end customers, and I think with V4, some of that capability might also be available to developers.
Got it. So I think this is like two like kind of future forward thinking type thing. So, will there somebody suggesting the ability to a service, right? So just like we have an automated sales tax service, a service to actually verify the addresses themselves. So if there's a shipping address that's not valid, I know that those services exist. There's other APIs that exist for this, but do you think this is something that maybe we would start providing as a service?
I think we could, because this is a capability that we have internally. I think most of this comes down to prioritization and being able to ship it out. But I think the service exists internally as an API, so we'll figure out. And I do see the value in putting it out there for developers to verify, so that they don't have to guess that an address or hope that an address might be parsable when they send it in. So we have a US I think USPS CAS certified API, which kind of can parse an address that is given and figure out if it makes sense. So I'll see if I can reach out to folks internally to make that available to you guys.
And then kind of riffing off of that, like obviously this is a sales tax service for QuickBooks, right? But obviously we're developers and we have APIs. So if a developer is building a shopping cart, they obviously could use some other sales tax API service to calculate sales tax in their shopping cart. Would the sales tax API actually have its own separate calls where they, like, maybe they're not building a QuickBooks integration, but they could actually use our sales tax service in their other app as a tax calculator?
Yeah, so right now the plan is to make it available as a V4 app, which means that you will be able to, and it is going to be in the context of a company the way most of our V3 APIs today are, that, in the context of a company, you're going to be able to ask for recommendations of what tax to apply given the details of an invoice. But we do recognize the potential of it to go beyond the realm of just a QBO company context. but we haven't really made a decision on moving in that direction yet.
Yeah, I mean, we have to one thing at a time, right? Let's just get it to work perfect in QBO first, right? And like go from there. But that's interesting. Okay, got it. Couple, yeah, I think you answered the one about not having to send any tax code. Let's see. Yeah, we talked about watching last week's Hangout video on YouTube, all about the V4. The tax exempt status, can you pull that? I think we talked about tax exempt status. And, yeah, we caught the tax exempt status. Yes, we wanted to kind of clarify, and I think we've covered this as well. Like, will the function to calculate taxes based on an entry of products, addresses, et cetera, so that way in our own app we can be right. So it's going back to that like estimating, right, and pulling it out. So you could put a partial transaction in, get the correct amount. So in your app, you're using the correct amount, so that when it gets the QuickBooks, it's not going to get changed once it's uploaded there. So I think you've talked about that already. So this is kind of an overall question that is, maybe referencing the release of this. Somebody wants to know if you can comment on releasing this feature that affected many app integrations, but it was never really set up so developers could correctly handle it correctly. It wasn't in the sandbox. The detection and the instructions. Can you just kind of comment on the release and why it was a little, to be honest, from even my perspective, it was rough. Me being somebody who cares about the developers, it was a little bit rough, this release. Possibly you can comment on how that happened or the why that happened and how we're gonna not do that in the future, maybe.
Yeah, I think one of the ways in which we are trying to mitigate. So first of all, I acknowledge that comment, and I'm with you on everything you said. We probably. So I think Sandbox was probably the primary thing that we didn't put enough focus on, I think it was also, kind of a blind spot for us because we were working in the tax team, and our exposure to developers has been quite minimal because of just the 3 or 4 APIs that we have out there. So that has been a learning for us. And one thing that we've done, so for instance, we put out this blog recently about an upcoming change. So that change is already present in production today. But what we did, and it's been in production for about 3 weeks now, but we've turned it off in production because we wanted to make sure that we did enough on the communication front, which is why we put out the blog about 2 weeks back. And we are still waiting for feedback. I think we've also reached out proactively to developers to understand if they have suggestions or feedback on it. And we've also tried to prioritize the sandbox work, so it should be available pretty soon. Yeah. But it was a miss on our part, and part of it was due to us not paying enough attention, and another part might have been that this was a paradigm shift in how things were, like taxes were calculated. So it was going to cause some churn.
And I'm just putting a link to that blog post in the chat.
Yeah.
I just posted that in. I also posted the link again to the two developer videos that you guys can reference as well.
So Vikram, the answer is yes.
Okay.
It's only for AST companies. Yeah.
Got it. There's still questions coming in about, will the migration be forced? Will we be forced to convert? Let's make sure we really, in the FAQ, we're really clear about this timeline and who gets pushed to what. And maybe there's a chart or a table so people can reference like, okay, this data from this customer won't be pushed to AST automatically. This data will. Just kind of what the rule and the thought process on that, because those questions just keep coming in. So we definitely need to get something in writing that's a little more clear. And so we will do that in the FAQs after the fact on this. Get that out. Trying to think here. So somebody's asking about tax exempt questions, tax exempts again, pulling. I think we caught that one. I think he just asked it two different ways. Okay, that caught that one. I just don't want to leave anybody's questions unanswered here. Someone's talking about categories. So instead of applying like sales tax to individual items or individual customers, but maybe you have a category like alcohol and that gets a certain tax rate, and carbonated drinks gets a certain tax rate, and maybe apples don't, or fruit does not have any tax. Can you speak to that at all as far as categories?
Yeah, in fact, I mean, we do not have tax codes on items. What we do have are categories with AST. So I don't think the categories, like I think we touched upon this a little earlier, where we were talking about whether the category information is available in the V3 API, and I think it is, but I would have to check again. But if you navigate to like the page within QBO, you should be able to see that there's a new attribute in the item creation process where you're actually asked to kind of tell us, what kind of item we're dealing with. So in the absence of specifying anything explicitly, we consider it as a default category called taxable retail. We consider the item taxable. So let me see if I can quickly just share that.
Okay.
Okay. So this is a sales tax category here. So if you can see my screen, so food and grocery and.
Actually, you're not sharing yet. You might have to flip over and share. Sorry about that.
Okay. Yeah. If you can see my screen now.
Yes.
What I did was I logged into a QBO production company, and I'm looking at the item creation screen. So I've given the name as Cola, and there's a sales tax category drop down here, where I can actually map it to. I'm kind of mapping it to a category that the tax engine can recognize. So food and grocery, and then it's a 2-level list. So once I say food and grocery, it kind of narrows it down, and then it goes to carbonated beverages. We're also working on trying to make this part seamless, and this should not be an additional piece of information that you can tell us. So we are exploring ways in which we can glean this category information from the name and description of the item itself. But it all depends on the clarity of the description and so on.
So if you scroll down back to the UI on that, those sales tax categories, are those available in the API? That's a question that quickly came in.
So this is not available in V3.
Okay.
Yeah, but it is available in V4.
It's available in V4. Okay, got it. And then can you possibly show some code sample, or so a lot of this question is how can we override or force the actual amount? So if I'm doing something after the fact and this is the actual sales tax collected, it was $3.75, I can't just go with whatever QuickBooks calculates. I got to put in what I calculated and that was actually on the record of the sale.
Okay.
Kind of show how to override. That'd be great.
Yeah, and I assume this is overriding through the API and not the UI, right? Obviously.
That's correct. Okay. And then can you zoom in a little on this? It's a little small.
So let me see how I can do that.
Just Control plus, because that's just Postman, right? Yeah, perfect.
Okay. So let me just copy this into a notepad. Okay, so this is the body of an invoice. You'd be familiar with this. This is an array of lines. You have an amount. You have the sales item line detail, the item ref, and so on. The tax code ref is tax. This is a sale with just one line in it. So the tax code ref is tax, and then you have the transaction tax detail section, where you can just specify the total tax with the amount that you want to override with. Okay, and there is no mention of what tax code you want us to apply or what the tax rate split looks like. That is something that you would have had to send in earlier. But now, even if you just send us this amount, And this 33.82 here might be tax that that an external system in which the sale was actually executed might have calculated. Will be able to honor this 33.82 that you send in, and just make sure that this amount is distributed correctly among the rates that we think are applicable on that invoice. Does this help?
Yeah, I think so. It's I think it's a little clearer on that. So we are definitely 15 minutes over time. I know there's about 30 of you still attending. Kind of a last call here for any more questions that you guys do have. So what that somebody is asking about, like, because it sounds like a lot of the goodness is really in V4, right? So people are wondering, like, when's does the V4 sales tax stuff become available? And then based on that, somebody wants to, can we put the migration of existing QBO files on hold until that happens? But it's not really, we're not really migrating people, right? It's just if somebody is not using sales tax and then they start using it, they're getting it. We're not really migrating somebody's old sales tax and old structure to a new format. It's just they're using the new format.
Yeah, so if you've never set up taxes before, and if you try to set up taxes now, you're going to get the AST track, as I said before. But if you've already set up taxes the old way, we are going to, it's going to be an explicit step, at least the way it is now, is that you have to opt into the AST experience. So the flexibility is left up to the users to exercise.
Okay.
Yeah, but I do take the other point about trying to ensure that we expedite the rollout of V4, especially on tax recommendation. We are putting our energy behind that to make the tax recommendation API available.
Got it. And for those of you that want early access, I'm going to post a link in as well for the V4 APIs. You can actually request early access. So as soon as we're in a situation, or Pradeep's team's in a situation where they want developers to maybe start testing the V4 APIs and start using them, you can apply for early access and get them that list like, hey, I have this use case with sales tax. I need access to those V4 APIs, and they'll start prioritizing. And as those go out, and maybe they just need feedback, like, how should this sales tax API work, right? And they want some feedback from you. So I just put a link in that. You can actually sign up for early access to the V4 APIs on that as well. And Brian's asking about the V4 release date. Unfortunately, we don't have any exact dates. One thing we talked about last week's Hangout is the V4 is not just going to be like, okay, we're done with V3, everybody switch to V4. We're releasing V4 kind of in stages as pieces are done. And we're really starting with the gaps that are in V3. For example, that's why the very first thing rolling out for V4 is going to be the payroll APIs, because there's no payroll APIs whatsoever, right? And I imagine with the sales tax, automated sales tax feature, it's lacking some stuff. So I imagine that's going to be a higher priority, right? But if something has existing good functionality in V3, yes, there's going to be a V4 API eventually, but the rollout is not going to be as prioritized in the same way the payroll API is prioritized, or possibly the sales tax API is prioritized. So there's not really a release date specific, but as these are ready to go out the door, we are moving people to the V4 APIs, and so you'd be able to use both in your app development. Still some more questions coming in. Yes, another question about the recording. Again, this will be available. All you have to do is go to YouTube and search for Intuit Developer, and you will find all these recordings. I will put the link in again in the chat. Please click on it and bookmark it, folks, here. YouTube Developer, IPP Developer videos. So I just pasted that in the chat so you guys have access to the link to that as well. Let's see. Just record tax exempt. So somebody's making a request like the tax exempt thing. It feels like that's something that kind of has to happen now and can't wait till V3. So it's something, I mean, with you being the manager of this, is something to take back and reassess if that's something we should be squeezing to V3 or, accelerated through. An opinion on that. Sorry, YouTube just started playing in my other browser tab, and that's a little loud. All right, sorry about that. Somebody wanted to ask a question about seeing the new invoice object and they put new in quotes. So I'm not totally sure if maybe you referenced to something is new, and I'm not sure on that one.
So this payload should be for people trying to create a new invoice. So I'm not sure what that's referring to.
Okay. Unfortunately, got it.
Oh, that you don't need a tax code. Okay. So you can actually just omit this section completely. If you look at this, so what I meant by the new updates, I think this is something that we published on our blog about 2 weeks back. This is the code is in production, but it's turned off. We'll post an update when we do turn it on. But what we're saying is that, if you didn't specify the tax code ref section, and if you even kind of omitted the entire transaction tax detail section, and if your invoice payload looked just like this would be deemed taxable, and our tax engine would attempt to apply taxes on this. So if you do not want taxes to be applied, the way to do that is to say none. And this is again only for companies that are on AST, which you can determine through the prefs API.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, that blog post I think has a little chart to the non, and that kind of determines all that. So definitely hit that blog post about that came out. I want to say March 28th, and it does talk about this stuff here. Yes, they're sending the tax code at the invoice level, not at the line item.
That's fine. So, but you're indicating, which lines you want to you want to apply that tax code against when you say tax in the tax code ref. So you don't need to send the tax code in the transaction. So when you say tax code at the transaction level, you would specify that here. You would say total tax, and then you would talk about the tax code ref and give a ID here. What we're saying is that, that is not necessary going forward. If you want AST is anyway going to apply its own tax. So unless you have a preference of total tax amount that you want to specify, if you have an external system from where you are sourcing the invoice, you can just omit this entire section and we would apply taxes automatically.
Got it.
Okay. Okay, sure. Yeah.
Got it. So I think just one last question. Somebody wants to know, what's the minimum required to send in that rate, even if they're not overriding?
So if you want to delegate even the calculation of the tax amount to AST, you can just omit this transaction tax detail section completely. You can even omit this part. You can leave it as it is. You can omit. That's up to you. So if your invoice looks like this with no mention of tax at all, we would still attempt to apply taxes on this. So this is the bare minimum that is required.
Yeah, in the if you're not going to send it at all, at least make sure you're sending a correct shipping address or a sales address so it gets calculated correctly.
Yeah.
Got it. No, that makes sense for sure. Perfect. I think we've caught up with all the questions. I mean, there's a lot. I think like 59 came in or whatever today. So thank you very much. Again, everybody that's listening or watching us on YouTube, we will put out an FAQ and we'll take all these questions, we'll reorganize them and structure them, and we'll make an FAQ out all the questions that came in today and put that on the blog site so you guys can follow up with those. Pradeep, thank you. I think the last time we did this, when the changes first went out, I had a fire alarm and I had to leave in the middle of this. So now you had a power outage. So I don't know, the sales tax odds are not on our side here. So with these. So, but I do thank you. We did get through it. We did run a little bit over, but I think things are on track, and I think people learned a lot today about the sales tax, and going forward, it's just going to get easier for everybody because the more we can get content out there, the more people understand the use cases, the more people understand what's happening with it, you'll start to see that more people are comfortable with it. And even some of those stats I think you were talking about, like, hey, it's been rolled out now. There's 70,000 companies using AST, and we're not really having these issues. Like all these fears people have of automated calculations maybe are in our heads. Right. And it'd be interesting to maybe if you could start releasing some data on those numbers. That'd be interesting as well.
Okay. Yeah,
Perfect.
I'll dig those out.
Awesome. Well, everybody, thank you for joining. And again, tune in next week because closing date's a whole nother topic of discussion of API issues where developers aren't understanding closing date. They're trying to put transactions in. The transactions won't write. They get errors back. They're not handling the errors correctly. So come back next week if you guys are struggling with closing date problems at all. All right. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Bye.